The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep hum that echoed through the vast space. Ambassador Taemin Park walked through those doors with steady steps, his black diplomatic uniform clean and pressed. Behind him followed his aide Hana Kim, carrying a small recording device and a stack of papers that nobody would read. The chamber was huge, so huge that Taemin always felt small when he entered it. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds sometimes formed in the upper levels. Around the circular room, seats were arranged in perfect rows, each section marked with the symbols of different alien species. 47 different species had seats in this room. 47 different voices that spoke and voted on matters that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. The human section was in the far corner. Always in the far corner. The seats were smaller than the others, made of simple metal instead of the fancy materials used for the other species. There were only 3 seats for humans, while some species had dozens. The message was clear. Humans did not matter much here. Taemin took his usual seat and looked around the room. The Vextar section was directly across from him, their tall, reptilian forms easy to spot with their green scales and yellow eyes. Next to them sat the Korath, massive creatures with 6 arms each, their warlike culture evident in the battle scars that covered their thick skin. The Zalani occupied the prime seats near the center, their blue skin gleaming under the chamber lights as they counted profits from their latest trade deals. The session began with the usual ceremony. Lights dimmed, music played, and the speaker of the council stepped forward. Today, it was Councillor Crixnol of the Vextar, his long neck swaying as he spoke in the ancient ritual words. "We gathered today to speak for the good of all species in the galaxy," Crixnol said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's sound system. "All voices will be heard, all concerns will be addressed." Taemin almost smiled at the lie. Human. Voices had not been heard in this chamber for 3 years now. Not since the council had voted to make humanity a developing species, despite the fact that human technology was more advanced than most species in the room. The vote had been swift and final. No human colonies beyond certain limits. No human votes on important matters. No human input on galactic law. The decision had been made because humans were too young as a galactic species. Only 200 years since first contact, they said. Not enough time to understand galactic politics. Better to let the older, wiser species guide them. What the council really meant was that humans had grown too fast, too strong. In 200 years, humanity had spread to over 300 worlds. Their ships were faster than Vextar vessels. Their weapons were more effective than Korath arms. Their trade networks rivaled the Zalani Empire. This scared the older species, so they voted. 44 species voted to limit humanity. 3 species voted against the motion. 0 species abstained. The humans, of course, were not allowed to vote on their own fate. "Today we address the matter of mining rights in the Kepler sector," Crixnol announced. His yellow eyes swept across the room and stopped on the human section. A thin smile crossed his reptilian features. "I see our silent friends have joined us again. How wonderful." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not friendly laughter, but the kind that comes when people enjoy someone else's embarrassment. Taemin kept his face blank. Next to him, Hana adjusted her recording device slightly. Everything was being recorded. Every word, every laugh, every insult. "Tell me, humans," Crixnol continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Have you found your voices yet? Or do you plan to continue this childish silent treatment?" More laughter. The Korath section pounded their 6 arms on their desks in Dail. Approval. The Zalani made their clicking sound that passed for amusement among their kind. Even some of the smaller species joined in, happy to mock someone else for once instead of being mocked themselves. Taemin said nothing. Hana said nothing. This was the policy. 3 years ago, when the vote had stripped them of their rights, the human government had made a decision. No more begging, no more pleading, no more trying to convince these species that humanity deserved better treatment. Instead, they would watch, they would listen, they would learn. The Zalani Trade Minister Vorthak leaned forward in his seat. His blue skin had strange patterns that shifted color when he was amused, and right now those patterns were bright yellow. "Perhaps they have forgotten how to speak," Vorthak said in his high, musical voice. "Should we hire teachers for them? I know some very good language instructors who work with primitive species." The chamber erupted in laughter again. This time, even some of the usually quiet species joined in. The Thalan delegates whistled their approval. The Zentari made harsh barking sounds that served as their version of laughter. Taemin felt Hana tense beside him, but she remained silent. They both remained silent. This was what the council expected now. This was what they had become comfortable with. 3 years of human silence had made them bold. 3 years of no human complaints had made them careless. What they did not know was that silence could be a weapon, too. While they laughed and made jokes, Taemin was counting how many species joined in the mockery, counting which ones stayed quiet, counting the small signs that told him which species were truly confident and which ones were just following the crowd because it felt safer. While they made fun of human silence, Hana was recording everything, not just the words, but the tone, the body language, the reactions. All of this data would go back to Earth, where teams of analysts would study every detail. Back on Earth, Dr. So-Young Lee was waiting for these recordings. She and her team at the Strategic Development Institute had been building files on every species in the Council for 3 years now. They knew which species depended on others for food. They knew which ones had weak militaries hiding behind strong allies. They knew which governments were stable and which ones were one crisis away from collapse. The Council thought humanity was being punished by their silence. They thought the humans were sulking like children who had not gotten their way. They were wrong. Humanity was learning. Every insult taught them something about alien psychology. Every vote showed them the real power structures in the galaxy. Every session gave them more information about their enemies, because that was what these species were now, whether they knew it or not. Enemies. The session continued with its usual business. Trade routes were discussed. Border disputes were settled. Military movements were approved or denied. Through it all, the humans sat in their corner and said nothing. They were ignored completely, as if they were not even there. This was fine with Taemin. Being ignored meant being underestimated. Being underestimated was an advantage he planned to use. As the session ended, Crixinol made one final comment. "Same time next week, my silent friends," he called out to the human section. "Perhaps by then you will remember how to use those primitive vocal cords." Taemin stood up slowly and walked toward the chamber doors. Behind him, alien voices continued their conversations, making deals and forming alliances. None of them paid attention to the quiet human ambassador and his aide as they left the room. None of them noticed the small smile on Taemin's face as the doors closed behind him. The council had grown comfortable with human silence. Soon they would learn that sometimes the quiet ones were just listening, and sometimes what they heard was enough to change everything. 6 months had passed since the last session where the council had laughed at human silence. 6 months of the same routine, humans attending meetings, saying nothing, and being ignored. The other species had grown so used to this pattern that they barely noticed when Taemin and Hana entered the chamber anymore. Today felt different, though. There was excitement in the air, the kind that came when big decisions were about to be made. The Korath section was fuller than usual, with War Master Gethrix himself attending instead of sending a minor representative. His massive form took up 2 seats, all 6 of his arms moving as he spoke quietly with his advisors. Gethrix was not the kind of leader who came to council sessions unless something important was happening. He was a warrior first, a politician second. His presence meant the Korath were planning something that required council approval. The session began normally enough. Trade reports were read, minor disputes were settled. The humans sat in their corner and were ignored, as always. But Taemin noticed things that others missed. He saw how the Korath delegates kept checking the time. He saw how certain species seemed nervous, their representatives fidgeting in their seats. He saw how the Zalani Trade Minister Vorthak kept glancing at a data pad that he tried to hide from view. Something was coming. When War Master Gethrix finally stood to address the council, the chamber fell silent. Even the species that usually whispered during boring sessions paid attention when a Korath War Master spoke. Gethrix was famous across the galaxy for his military victories. His battle scars told stories of a dozen conquered worlds. Honored Council. Members, Gethrix began, his voice deep and rough like grinding stone. The Korath hegemony brings before you a matter of great importance. We have discovered significant resource deposits in the Kepler sector that are not being properly utilized. Taemin felt his stomach tighten. The Kepler sector contained 3 human colonies: New Sol, Bright Harbor, and Green Valley. Nearly 2 million humans lived on those worlds, building lives and raising families far from Earth. The species currently occupying these worlds, Gethrix continued, not even bothering to say human, has shown no interest in proper resource extraction. They use primitive farming methods and small-scale mining operations. This is wasteful in a galaxy where resources are precious. The War Master activated a holographic display that showed the 3 human worlds. Red markers appeared at various points on each planet, indicating valuable mineral deposits that lay underground. These worlds contain enough rare metals to supply the galactic shipbuilding industry for 50 years, Gethrix announced. Yet they sit unused, while the current occupants play in the dirt, like children. Laughter came from several sections of the chamber. The Vextar found it especially amusing, with Crixnall nodding his long neck in agreement. The Korath hegemony, therefore, requests salvage rights to these underutilized resources, Gethrix said, his yellow eyes sweeping across the chamber. Since the current occupants refuse to participate in proper diplomatic channels, we invoke the ancient right of resource reclamation. Taemin knew exactly what salvage rights meant in galactic law. It meant the Korath could take whatever they wanted from those worlds. The legal language made it sound clean and proper, but everyone knew what really happened when the Korath claimed salvage rights. They strip-mined entire planets. The vote was called immediately. No discussion, no debate, no time for anyone to ask questions about the 2 million humans who lived on those worlds. Species after species voted in favor of the Korath request. The Vextar voted yes. The Zalani voted yes. The Thalen voted yes. 44 species voted to give the Korath the right to destroy 3 human worlds. 0 species voted against it. 3 species abstained, but only because they were not present for the session. The humans, as always, were not allowed to vote on matters that affected them. Taemin sat perfectly still as the vote was announced. Next to him, Hana continued recording everything, her face showing no emotion. They had both known this day might come. The human government had prepared them for this possibility. But knowing something might happen and watching it actually happen were 2 different things. The motion passes, announced the speaker. The Korath hegemony is granted full salvage, rights to the specified worlds in the Kepler sector. Resource extraction may begin immediately. Gethrix smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. The hegemony thanks the Council for this wise decision. We will begin operations within the week. As the session ended and species began filing out of the chamber, several aliens stopped to congratulate Gethrix on his success. The Zalani Trade Minister Vorthak was especially pleased, no doubt already calculating the profits from shipping Korath-extracted resources across the galaxy. None of them looked at the human section. None of them seemed to remember that actual. People lived on the worlds they had just given away. Taemin and Hana remained in their seats until the chamber was nearly empty. Only then did they stand and walk toward the exit. As they passed the Korath section, War Master Gethrix called out, "To them, 'Do not worry, humans,' he said with mock kindness. 'We will make good use of your former colonies. Much better use than you ever did.'" Taemin stopped walking. For a moment it looked like he might finally break his 3 years of silence. The entire remaining council held their breath, waiting to see if the human would finally speak. Instead, Taemin simply nodded once and continued walking. 3 days later, the images reached Earth. The Korath had wasted no time beginning their resource extraction. Massive mining ships had landed on all 3 worlds simultaneously. They brought with them the industrial equipment needed to strip mine entire continents in a matter of weeks. They had not bothered to evacuate the human colonists first. Admiral Jun Ho Choi was awakened at 3 in the morning by an urgent communication from the colonies. The transmission was brief and filled with static, but the message was clear. The Korath were mining through cities with people still inside them. Families were trapped in their homes as alien machinery tore apart the ground beneath their feet. The transmission cut off before Admiral Choi could respond. By 5 in the morning, emergency sessions were being held in government buildings across Earth. By 8 in the morning, Dr. So-Young Lee had completed her strategic analysis of the situation. The conclusion was simple and terrible. Diplomacy had failed. The council system had failed. The old way of doing things had failed. It was time for humanity to try a new approach. Captain Mi Young Song received her orders while her ship, the Silent Thunder, was conducting routine patrol operations near the edge of human space. The orders were sealed and marked with the highest security classification. When she opened them, she found a single line of text. "Operation Silent Response is authorized. Execute immediately." Captain Song had been waiting 2 years for those orders. Her ship and crew had been training for this moment since the day the Council had first stripped humanity of its voting rights. The Silent Thunder was not like other human ships. It was designed specifically to be invisible to alien sensors, built using technology that humanity had developed in secret. The Council thought they knew everything about human capabilities. They were wrong. Within hours of receiving her orders, Captain Song and her crew were moving toward Korath space. They were not alone. Across the galaxy, other human ships were receiving similar orders and beginning similar journeys. The Council had just learned what happened when they pushed humanity too far. For 3 years, humans had remained silent while being insulted, ignored, and humiliated. They had endured restrictions on their colonies, limitations on their trade, and exclusion from important decisions. But watching 2 million innocent people be buried alive while alien corporations counted their profits was something humanity would not endure silently. The breaking point had been reached, and when humanity finally broke their silence, the galaxy would never be the same. The data crystal that Taemin had left on the council podium contained 3 years of carefully gathered secrets. Every conversation overheard at diplomatic dinners, every weakness noticed during trade negotiations, every detail about alien technology, politics, and military strength that humanity had observed while pretending to be harmless and defeated. Dr. So-Young Lee had spent months organizing all this information into a single, devastating package. The crystal contained the locations of every council member's homeworld, their military bases, their trade routes, and most importantly, their fears. She knew which species were afraid of economic collapse. She knew which ones feared military attack. She knew which governments were so corrupt that exposure would destroy them overnight. But the council members did not know any of this as they gathered in emergency session 3 days after Taemin's dramatic exit. They were too busy. laughing about humanity's childish tantrum to bother reading the data crystal. Most of them assumed it contained angry complaints or desperate pleas for mercy. They were wrong. 72 hours after humanity's withdrawal from the Council, the first strike came without warning. The Korath mining operation on New Sol simply went dark. All communications stopped. The massive industrial ships that had been tearing apart the human colony suddenly fell silent. When Korath scout vessels arrived to investigate, they found something impossible. The mining equipment was still there, undamaged and still running. The orbital stations were intact and fully powered. But every single Korath worker had vanished. Thousands of alien miners, supervisors, and security guards had disappeared without leaving any trace of violence or struggle. Captain Mi-Young Song watched the scout ships from her position aboard the Silent Thunder, hidden just beyond their sensor range. Her boarding teams had worked with perfect efficiency, using sleep gas and teleportation technology to remove every Korath from the mining operation in less than 20 minutes. The alien workers were now safely stored in holding cells aboard human ships, alive but unconscious. They would remain that way until humanity decided what to do with them. Phase 1 complete, Captain Song reported to Admiral Choi over the encrypted communication channel. Moving to Phase 2. Admiral Choi smiled as he received the report from his command center on Earth. Operation Silent Response was proceeding exactly as planned. 47 ships like the Silent Thunder were moving through space undetected, each one designed to be invisible to alien sensors using technology that humanity had developed during their 3 years of supposed weakness. The Council had dismissed human technology as primitive. They had no idea that human scientists had been working around the clock to create weapons and ships specifically designed to counter every known alien defense system. Phase 2 began 12 hours later when the Yao Vextar discovered that their primary trade routes had become very dangerous places. Counselor Crixnall was in his private office on the Vextar homeworld when the reports started coming in. Cargo ships were disappearing throughout Vextar space. Not destroyed, disappeared. The ship's emergency beacons would activate automatically, then cut off after exactly 30 seconds. When rescue vessels arrived at the beacon locations, they found nothing but empty space. What Crixnall did not know was that Colonel Dongwu Han and his Special Forces teams had been studying Vextar physiology for 3 years. They knew exactly how long a Vextar could survive in different atmospheric conditions. They knew which gases would make them unconscious without harming them. They knew how to board Vextar ships and remove the crews so quickly that the aliens never had time to send distress calls. The missing cargo ships were being taken to hidden human bases, their crews joining the growing collection of alien prisoners that humanity was accumulating. Crixnall tried to contact other council members for help, but he discovered that most of them were dealing with similar problems. The Thalen Confederacy had lost half their orbital defense platforms overnight. The Zentari intelligence network had gone completely silent. Even the powerful Zelani were reporting massive disruptions to their trade empire. What terrified the council members most was that none of their enemies were claiming responsibility. There were no demands for surrender, no threats or ultimatums, no grand speeches about revenge. The attacks were happening in complete silence, just like the humans had been for the past 3 years. War Master Gethrix was the first to realize what was happening. He was reviewing reports of missing Korath personnel when the pattern became clear. Every species that had voted to give the Korath salvage rights was now under attack. Every government that had laughed at human silence was now facing mysterious disasters. But when Gethrix tried to contact the Terran Federation to negotiate, he discovered that humanity was no longer accepting communications from Council species. All diplomatic channels had been closed. Earth's embassies had been abandoned. It was as if humanity had simply decided that the rest of the galaxy no longer existed. Dr. So-Young Lee was coordinating the entire operation from her command center, beneath the mountains of Korea. Screens around the room showed the status of human operations across dozens of star systems. Green lights indicated successful missions. Yellow lights showed operations in progress. There were no red lights. Humanity had not failed a single objective. Intelligence reports that the Zilani are trying to trace our ship movements, reported Agent Sun-Hee Choi from her deep cover position within the Zentari government. She had spent 3 years pretending to be a primitive human seeking to learn from superior alien wisdom. In reality, she had been gathering intelligence on the most secretive species in the galaxy. Let them try, Dr. Lee replied calmly. Their sensors cannot detect our new ships. Their intelligence networks are compromised. Their informants work for us now. This was the truth that the Council was only beginning to understand. For 3 years, while they had been dismissing humanity as a developing species, human agents had been infiltrating alien governments at every level. The same diplomatic immunity that had protected human representatives during council sessions had also protected human spies as they gathered secrets from their hosts. Agent Sun-Hee Choi was just one of hundreds of human operatives who had used the Council's arrogance against them. When aliens saw humans as primitive and harmless, they became careless about security. They spoke freely around human servants. They left important documents where human cleaners could photograph them. They treated human diplomats like furniture, forgetting that furniture could listen and remember. Now all of those carefully gathered secrets were being used against their former owners. The Zentari discovered this when they tried to activate their network of hidden bases, only to find that humanity already knew the location of every single one. Zentari commanders arrived at their secret facilities to find them empty, their personnel missing, and their equipment disabled. The Thalan Confederacy learned the same lesson when they attempted to use their backup communication systems. The systems had been quietly sabotaged months earlier by human technicians who had been dismissed as too primitive to understand advanced alien technology. Even the Zilani, who prided themselves on their economic intelligence, found their trade. Networks disrupted by humans who knew more about Zilani business practices than most Zilani did. Engineer Ki Wan-jung was particularly proud of his team's work on alien communication systems. For 3 years, they had been studying every piece of alien technology they could access through diplomatic channels. Now they could disrupt, disable, or take control of almost any alien system in the galaxy. The Vextar are trying to send emergency messages to their military bases, Kiwan reported to Dr. Lee. Should I let them through? No, Dr. Lee replied. Let them wonder why their calls for help are not being answered. The truth was that the Vextar military bases were already under human control. Captain Yoon Seo Park and her boarding specialist had perfected the art of taking over alien installations without firing a single shot. They would arrive invisibly, disable the base's defenses, and remove all personnel before anyone realized what was happening. The alien crews would wake up in comfortable prison cells, confused but unharmed. Their bases would continue operating normally, but now under human control. As reports of the mysterious attacks spread through council space, panic began to set in. Government officials who had spent years mocking human weakness now found themselves helpless against an enemy they could not see, could not contact, and could not understand. The council called emergency sessions, but their communication networks kept failing at crucial moments. They tried to coordinate military responses, but their fleets could not find targets to attack. They attempted to negotiate, but humanity was no longer listening to anything they had to say. For 3 years, the council had enjoyed the sound of their own voices while ignoring human silence. Now they were learning what real silence felt like. The Galactic Council chamber looked very different now. Half the seats sat empty, their former occupants too busy dealing with crises on their homeworlds to attend meetings. The remaining council members huddled together in small groups, whispering, nervously and jumping at every sound. Counselor Crixnall stood at the central podium, but his usual arrogance was gone. His reptilian features looked tired and stressed. Dark circles had formed around his yellow eyes, and his once proud posture had become hunched with worry. "We must face the truth," Crixnall said to the half-empty chamber. "The humans have been planning this for years. Every day we mocked their silence. They were preparing for war." The word war sent ripples of fear through the remaining delegates. But was it really war? The humans had not destroyed any cities. They had not killed any civilians. They had not even damaged most of the infrastructure they had captured. Instead, they had simply made entire alien fleets, bases, and installations disappear overnight. War Master Gethrix was notably absent from the session. The mighty Korath leader was trapped on his homeworld, which had been surrounded by invisible human ships for the past week. Every time Korath vessels tried to leave the planet, they simply vanished. Every communication sent off-world was blocked. The entire Korath hegemony had been cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The few alien ships that had managed to escape human capture brought back disturbing reports. The missing crews were alive and well in human prison facilities. They were being treated with care, given proper food and medical attention. Some reported that their human guards were even polite to them. This somehow made everything more frightening. An enemy who tortured prisoners was predictable. An enemy who captured thousands of people without harming them was something else entirely. "They are not acting like conquerors," whispered Ambassador Quilax of the Zentari. "They are acting like they are cleaning up a mess." The Zentari had perhaps suffered the worst losses of all. Their entire intelligence network, built over centuries, had been destroyed in 3 days. Worse, they had discovered that many of their most trusted agents had actually been working for humanity for years. Agent Sunhee Choi had revealed herself during the chaos, calmly walking out of Zentari intelligence headquarters with boxes of classified documents. When Zentari security tried to stop her, they found that their weapons had been disabled and their communication systems were jammed. "How long?" Quilax had asked her as she prepared to leave. "How long have you been working against us?" 3 years, Sunhee had replied. "Ever since you voted to treat my people like children." Now the Zentari sat in the council chamber, knowing that every secret they had ever kept was in human hands. Every hidden base, every covert operation, every dirty deal they had made in the shadows was now part of humanity's intelligence files. The Thaylen Confederacy had lost their entire orbital defense network in a single night. President Vexthul of the Confederacy had tried to surrender personally to the human forces, but there was no one to surrender to. The human ships remained invisible and silent. His messages to Earth went unanswered. Captain Hyunwoo Lee commanded the human task force surrounding the Thaylen homeworld from his ship, the Terra's Vengeance. His orders were simple. Prevent any Thaylen military vessels from leaving the system, but do not engage unless attacked first. So far, the Thaylen had been too frightened to attack. Their few remaining defense platforms had been shut down by human cyber warfare specialists. Their communication networks had been taken over by engineer Kiwon Jung's team. They could see human ships on their sensors now. Humanity had decided to let themselves be detected around Thaylen space as a show of force. The message was clear. Humanity could have remained invisible if they wanted to. They were choosing to be seen. 14 different species have sent surrender requests, reported Captain Mi Young-song during the daily briefing with Admiral Choi. They are offering to restore human voting rights and return our colonial territories. Admiral Choi looked at the list of surrender offers, then deleted the file. Tell them we will consider formal negotiations once they demonstrate good faith. They can start by returning our colonists and paying compensation to the families of those who died in the Korath mining operations. The problem was that the aliens could not return the human colonists. Most of them were dead, buried under tons of mining equipment when the Korath had decided that evacuating people would slow down their resource extraction. The few survivors had been rescued by human forces during the initial strikes against the Korath positions. This was something the council members were only now beginning to understand. They had not just authorized the theft of human worlds, they had authorized mass murder. 2 million people had died because the council wanted to access mineral deposits more quickly. Dr. So-Young Lee reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her command center. The alien governments were collapsing faster than her analysts had predicted. 3 species had suffered complete governmental breakdown when their corruption was exposed through leaked documents. 5 more were dealing with revolution as their oppressed populations learned about secret deals their leaders had made at their expense. The Korath are requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations, reported Colonel Dong-Woo Han. War Master Gethrix is offering to stand trial for war crimes if we will allow food shipments to reach their homeworld. Dr. Lee considered this. The Korath homeworld was completely blockaded, but humanity was allowing medical supplies and basic food through. They were not trying to starve the civilian population, just the military forces that had committed genocide against human colonists. Tell him we will consider his offer, Dr. Lee decided. But first, he must provide a complete list of every Korath officer who participated in the Kepler sector operations. The truth was that humanity already had this information. Agent Sun Hee Choi had obtained Korath military records months ago. But making Gethrix provide the names himself would be an admission of guilt that could be used in future war crimes trials. Back in the council chamber, the remaining species were beginning to realize the full scope of their situation. Humanity had not just defeated them militarily, they had outmaneuvered them politically, economically, and strategically on every level. They knew this day would come, Crixnall admitted to his fellow counselors. Every time we insulted them, every time we ignored them, every time we voted against their interests, they were preparing for this moment. The Zalani Trade Minister Vorthak had been notably quiet during recent sessions. His personal trade empire had collapsed when it was revealed that most of his profitable contracts had been obtained through bribery and corruption. Human agents had carefully documented every illegal deal over the past 3 years, then released the evidence to his competitors and customers simultaneously. What do they want from us? Vorthak asked desperately. Surrender? Tribute? Territory? This was the question that terrified the Council most. Throughout galactic history, when one species conquered another, their demands were usually clear. They wanted resources or territory or slaves or tribute payments. These were things that could be negotiated. But humanity seemed to want something different. They had not made any demands at all. They had simply withdrawn from galactic civilization and begun dismantling it piece by piece. The answer came 3 days later, when a human delegation arrived at the council station. Not to attend a session, to deliver a message. Ambassador Taemin. Park walked through the same chamber where he had endured 3 years of mockery, but this time he was not alone. Admiral Choi accompanied him, along with Dr. Lee, Captain Song, and a full diplomatic escort. The few remaining council members watched nervously as the humans took positions around the central speaking platform. They had not asked for permission to address the council. They had simply arrived and begun setting up their equipment. Honored council members, Taemin began, his voice carrying easily through the mostly empty chamber. The Terran Federation wishes to inform you of recent changes in galactic political structure. He activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked human-controlled space, nearly a third of all inhabited systems. Yellow zones showed species that had surrendered or requested human protection. Green zones indicated neutral territories that had signed non-aggression pacts with Earth. The tiny blue areas represented what remained of the old Council's authority. As you can see, Dr. Lee said, stepping forward, the balance of power has shifted significantly in recent weeks. We are here to explain how this affects your future operations. Crixnall found his voice with difficulty. You cannot simply dissolve The Galactic Council. We represent thousands of years of civilized order. Admiral Choi spoke for the first time, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. We are not dissolving anything. You are free to continue governing whatever territories remain under your control. However, those territories are now significantly smaller than they were a month ago. The message was becoming clear. Humanity was not destroying the old order, they were replacing it. The Council could continue to exist, but only as a minor, regional government with limited authority. The galaxy had new rules now, and humanity would be the ones writing them. 6 months after humanity had spoken their single sentence of withdrawal, Ambassador Taemin Park stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber. But everything had changed. The vast room that had once held representatives from 47 species now seated barely a dozen. Empty sections stretched across the circular chamber like missing teeth in an old skull. The remaining council members sat in a tight cluster near the center of the room, their once proud postures replaced by nervous glances and whispered conversations. They looked like survivors of a disaster, which in many ways they were. Councillor Crixnall waited at the speaker's podium, but he was no longer the arrogant leader who had mocked human silence months before. His reptilian features showed the stress of recent weeks. His government was barely holding on to power on the Vextar homeworld, and his people were demanding answers he could not provide. Ambassador Park, Crixnall began, his voice lacking its former confidence. The Council formally apologizes for our past misunderstandings regarding human capabilities. We would like to discuss terms for renewed Terran Federation membership in our organization. Taemin looked around the nearly empty chamber, taking in the vacant seats where humanity's greatest enemies had once sat. War Master Gethrix was in a human detention facility, awaiting trial for the genocide of 2 million colonists. Trade Minister Vorthak had fled to unknown regions of space when his corruption was exposed. Most of the other species had simply disappeared when their governments collapsed. You misunderstand our purpose here, Taemin replied calmly. We have not come to rejoin your council. We have come to inform you of the new galactic order. He activated the holographic display system, showing a detailed map of the galaxy as it existed today. The image was startling. Red zones marked direct, human control, systems where Earth's fleets maintained permanent presence. These covered nearly 40% of the galaxy's inhabited worlds. Yellow zones indicated allied species who had requested human protection after their own governments failed. These were worlds where local populations had welcomed human peacekeepers to restore order and prevent chaos. Green zones showed neutral territories, species who had signed non-aggression treaties with the Terran Federation and agreed to follow basic standards of civilized behavior. The small blue patches scattered around the galaxy's edge represented what remained of the old Council's authority. The Terran Federation is announcing the formation of the Galactic Defense Alliance, Dr. So-Young Lee said, stepping forward to address the stunned council members. Membership is voluntary and based on principles of mutual respect, shared defense, and ethical governance. Captain Mi Young-song added with quiet satisfaction. Former council species are welcome to apply for membership, provided they meet our standards for treatment of civilian populations and respect for sapient rights. The standards she mentioned were displayed on screens around the chamber. No strip mining of inhabited worlds, no slavery or forced labor, no genocide of inconvenient populations, no economic exploitation of developing species, no dismissing member concerns based on technological or cultural prejudice. In other words, everything the old council had allowed or encouraged was now forbidden. Crixnall stared at the display showing how little territory remained under council control. You cannot simply reorganize the entire galaxy, he protested weakly. There are laws, treaties, thousands of years of established order. Admiral Jun-Ho Choi spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of absolute military superiority. Those laws and treaties were written by species who believed might made right. You used your power to oppress others when it suited you. Now you discover what happens when someone else has more might. The truth was that humanity had not conquered the galaxy through military force alone. Most species had joined the Defense Alliance voluntarily after seeing what happened to governments that ignored their people's welfare. Agent Sun-Hee Choi had played a crucial role in this process. Her intelligence network had provided detailed information about which alien governments were corrupt and which ones actually served their populations. When the corrupt ones fell, humanity had been ready with alternatives. "What about our missing personnel?" asked Ambassador Quillax of the Zentari. "You have taken thousands of our people prisoner." Dr. Lee consulted a data pad before answering. "Your intelligence operatives are being held in comfortable facilities while we determine which ones were involved in war crimes. Those who committed no serious offenses will be released once their governments agree to basic standards of behavior." She paused, looking directly at Quillax. "However, those who participated in slavery, genocide, or other crimes against sapient life will face trial in Defense Alliance courts." This was not negotiable. Humanity had documented decades of alien atrocities that the Council had ignored or actively supported. War crimes trials would proceed regardless of what the remaining Council members wanted. Engineer Ki-Wan Jung had spent months preparing evidence for these trials. His teams had recovered deleted files from alien government, computers, analyzed communication records, and interviewed witnesses from dozens of worlds. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The old system failed because it was built on the assumption that some species were naturally superior to others. Taemin continued his explanation. "The Defense Alliance operates on different principles. Every member species has equal representation. Every member world has the right to self-determination. Every sapient being has basic rights that cannot be violated." The concept was simple but revolutionary. For thousands of years, galactic politics had been dominated by whoever had the biggest fleet or the most advanced technology. Species rose and fell based on military strength and economic power. Humanity was offering something different, a system based on cooperation rather than domination. Colonel Dongwoo Han had seen this new system work during the transition period. On worlds where corrupt governments had fallen, human peacekeepers had helped local populations establish new democratic institutions. Instead of imposing human rule, they had helped alien species govern themselves more effectively. The results had been remarkable. Planets that had suffered under decades of oppression were now thriving. Species that had been enslaved by stronger neighbors were now free to develop their own cultures and technologies. "How many species have joined this alliance?" Crixenall asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. Captain Hyun-Woo Lee consulted his command tablet. 31 species have been accepted as full members. 15 more have submitted applications that are under review. Another 22 have signed preliminary agreements. The numbers were staggering. In less than 6 months, humanity had assembled a coalition that dwarfed the old council in both size and capability. "What about us?" Vorthak's replacement as Zalani representative asked nervously. "What happens to the remaining council members?" Taemin's expression softened slightly. Despite everything these species had done, humanity was not interested in revenge for its own sake. "The Defense Alliance Embassy will remain open for any species interested in membership," he announced. "Our requirements are straightforward. Demonstrate respect for sapient rights, contribute to mutual defense, and participate in good faith negotiations when conflicts arise." He gestured toward the nearly empty chamber around them. "You are free to continue operating your council with whatever species choose to remain. However, you will do so within the territorial boundaries that have been established. Any attempt to expand beyond those boundaries will be considered an act of aggression." The message was clear, but not cruel. The old council could continue to exist as a minor regional government. They would not be destroyed or disbanded. They would simply be irrelevant. Dr. Lee concluded the presentation with a final observation. The old order treated silence as weakness and cooperation as submission. The Defense Alliance operates on the principle that strength comes from unity, not domination. We protected ourselves through preparation, not aggression. We responded to threats with competence, not emotion. She looked directly at Crixinol as she delivered her final words. You mocked our silence because you never asked why we chose it. We were listening, learning, and preparing. Now you live with the consequences of your assumptions. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Taemin turned back one final time. The Defense Alliance Embassy will remain operational for any species that wishes to join a civilization based on mutual respect rather than fear. We hope you will consider this opportunity carefully. The chamber fell silent as the humans departed. In the months that followed, 8 of the remaining council species would apply for Alliance membership. 3 would be accepted after demonstrating genuine reform. The others would continue their council meetings in an increasingly empty chamber, governing a handful of systems on the galaxy's edge. The Galactic Council still existed, but it had become a footnote in galactic history. The real power now rested with the Defense Alliance, where species worked together as equals rather than competing for dominance. Humanity had been silent for 3 years while enduring mockery and oppression. When they finally spoke, their words had reshaped the galaxy into something better than what came before.